Hello, welcome to Mental Health Now. I'm Kim McDevitt with MHA of Lancaster County. Today's topic is mental health in the workplace. Today we have with us Dr. Michael Diller. Dr. Diller is a licensed psychologist and director of WellSpan Employee Assistance Program, EAP.
Great, nice to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. We have Leslie Weyerbach, and Leslie is the owner and coach at Weyerbach Consulting and president of Lancaster Society for HR Management. Hi,
Thanks
Leslie.
for having me.
And Chris Wendon, and Chris is the executive director of ADVOS, Mediation and Restorative Practices. Hello.
It's great to be here.
Thank
Kim.
you for joining us today. So mental health has been on the forefront of conversation through the pandemic, but especially now in the workplace. So thank you so much for joining us in this very important conversation. Do you think there's been an increase in employees experiencing mental health challenges since the pandemic? We'll start with you, Dr. Diller.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I absolutely 100% think there has been a significant impact on everyone's mental health and well-being. Numbers through 2020 were that anxiety rates throughout the United States were tripled where they were same time in 2019. And depression rates were 4 times greater than where they were back in same time in 2019. And you now look at that, so that was through 2020 and into 2021. Now we're in 2022, and you think about the cumulative impact of the pandemic, I call it the pandemic storm that was kind of slow moving and rapidly changing, but yet there were so many other storms that unfolded during the last 2 years.
Right,
So it's the
right.
cumulative impact, and there is a significant toll on everyone's well-being. I attended a presentation not that long ago, and they were talking about Americans, 90% of Americans' mental health has been challenged in some way throughout this pandemic. And I think if we only look in the mirror, it's really 100% of us. And
Right, that's
so,
exactly right.
and it's all ages, and everyone has a unique story to live and tell, but it's impacting even our youngest generation. Actually, the hardest hit generation is the Gen Z group, our youngest generation. We have a national mental health crisis right now for children. 140,000 children lost a primary or secondary caregiver through the pandemic. So there's a cumulative impact, and what we do know about this pandemic storm is that even when we level set COVID-19, which we are now seeing some of that light right now, the lingering effects of the trauma related to what we've all endured collectively and uniquely in our own stories will last weeks, months, and years later.
It's interesting because when we look at the long-term COVID effects, we often refer to COVID brain, right, or COVID fog. And, it struck me the other day that it could be that COVID fog is related to stress, right? So we're experiencing stress. Maybe it has an impact on our memory, our concentration. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And, American Psychological Association does the Stress in America survey. And they do that since 2007. They just released another one in March. And they have seen stress ratings from Americans across the country at levels that they had never seen before since doing the study, the survey, since 2007. So what does that mean? So it's not just the pandemic. So we're coming into where we are now. Now it's the economy, it's inflation, it's the Ukraine situation, and all of those kinds of things that stir the uncertainty that we know fuels anxiety and all the other stressors. And sometimes we go through life and we just kind of keep our heads down. We're trying to take care of ourselves, take care of our families, do the best we can, and we don't even realize the impact.
Right.
We just keep
right.
going.
Yeah.
But there is an impact. You cannot not be impacted by what has happened in the last 2 years.
Well, our workplace has definitely been impacted. In 2021, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, over 47 million Americans voluntarily quit their jobs. That's the Great Resignation. What do you think that mental health challenges have impacted or contributed to the Great Resignation?
Yes, they definitely have. I think in some situations, employees realized that their employer wasn't supporting or recognizing their own individual challenges that they were facing, so they just simply resigned. Some of them resigned without having another position in place, either based on that lack of recognition or to take a break so that they didn't burn out. You know, some people unfortunately did experience burnout, and then that's what led to their resignation, but some did it as a preventive measure. And employees are really seeking alignment with their employer for that support, for the culture, for the company's purpose. You know, what are you doing that I know matters in this world with all the challenges you just mentioned and Mike mentioned? You know, there's so much happening. They're looking for that alignment, and quitting was really their preventive measure of doing that. And some of it comes back to simply flexibility. You know, if the employer wasn't willing to grant days for them to take off, if they just weren't feeling well or not feeling themselves, or they needed to have those breaks based on childcare or other situations, which was leading to stress and anxiety and all of those other things, they quit.
Wow. Well, mental health challenges, according to the Mental Health at Work report, are now the norm among employees across all organizational level, and 76% of respondents reported that they had at least one symptom of a mental health condition in the past year that affected their work. And that's up from 59% in 2019. So, yeah, I mean, people are impacted in the workplace, and the stress of the workplace. They rethink how they're working, what their purpose is, and so it has greatly contributed. Thank you. Have you seen a change, Chris, in the culture, in the emotional climate and culture of the workplace?
So yeah, it's a great question. And one of the things that we've found, if you look at the history of how employer-employee relationships have been, is probably about a decade or so ago, there used to be this idea that employees were required to come to work, and the idea was leave your baggage at home, right? Bosses were saying, you separate your life from your home, and we expect you to turn up, smiles on, ready to go.
Right.
And that's just not the reality, right? We can't separate that level of stress. And I think what's been really interesting to see over the last 3, 4, 5 years is that there's now been this realization that idea, that philosophy, we got to abandon it. We got to leave it behind and figure out how do we integrate the employee. And I think in many ways, Mike, what you've said is that at Adverse we experienced having to move an entire team remotely, and then all of a sudden you're having team meetings with your child on your lap. You're having team meetings with your dog jumping in over your shoulder. And so what employers are now realizing is, we haven't done relationships well. We haven't done conflict well. And when we figure out how to do those better, it actually creates a more engaged employee. What Leslie was saying, someone who wants to be where they are, and it helps with morale, it helps with productivity. And so in many ways, I just love the fact that we're now discovering that there's got to be a better way for employer and employee relationships to happen. And when you figure that out, in many ways, you actually want to be at work, right?
Right.
But it's challenging for employers to know, how much do I, ask someone, so how are you really doing, right? Like, put those check-ins aside and be like, wow, like, how are you really going?
Well, according to the Mental Health at Work report that I just referred to, 2/3 of respondents talked about their mental health to someone in the workplace in the past year. But only 49% of respondents described their experience as a positive one, or reported that they had positive outcomes. So when we talk about the culture, when we talk about culture, it's a very slow change. And we've seen a significant shift. Is that sustainable?
I think the challenge for employers is going to be something that I steal from a favorite author of mine, a guy by the name of Pat Lencioni, and he calls it the Great Rebording. Right? We talk about onboarding as bringing an employee in. So now when we're coming out of COVID, there's a sense where we have to reboard. Where supervisors, managers, bosses need to stand up and say, you know what? I didn't do conflict well. I didn't handle your stress. I didn't care for you. So we're going to make it now part of your, part of the culture that we have, where we're not going to have that separation of how you're doing at home and how you're doing here, right? We're going to encourage work-life balance. We're going to encourage those things so that you want to be here.
And is that our message that we're hearing? Because the three of us work with conflict, we work with mental health, emotional health. Leslie, what are you seeing?
He mentioned Pat Lencioni, and it's absolutely right. It comes back to that foundation of trust. Can the employees trust someone, at least one person in their organization that they can have that conversation with, so that then there's a path forward, there's steps to take, there's someone listening, that they know that. And yeah, it might lead to conflict and some debate per se on how to handle flexibility or how to handle reintegration, because everybody has their own ideas of what that looks like, what their needs are. They may be different now than they were before.
Yeah.
And they may change again in a month. So part of it is that adaptability, but having the foundation of trust really sets it up to
great.
be able to have conversations that matter.
It's
Yeah,
great.
and I totally agree with that. Everything. And Pat Lencioni, I love his work there. You know, he talks about building great teams, and what you need is you need to have people that are humble. You need people that are hungry and they're smart, like smart in the EQ, how we connect with each other and relate with each other. However, we have to the precursor to that is we have to make sure we send a clear message to the people that are walking into our doors every day, because you can't tease apart the personal story from the work and professional stories, that we have their back, that we care about them. And the Great Resignation was fueled by people asking the question, what really matters to me? What do I value? And when they answered that question, they talk about, like Leslie's talking about, in terms of, I want someone at my workplace that's going to take care of me, that's going to help lift me up, to be there to lean on. And it's trying to figure that out. How far do we go? Don't want to overstep, but you got to start somewhere. You got to be able to create that ability to have even that human connection. It was one of the greatest losses early in the pandemic, the loss of human
Right,
connection.
human
How do we reconnect? How do we re-onboard or reboard, re-enter, kind of what lies ahead in the future? So how do we do that? And you can start by even simple conversations to.
And that segues us nicely into our next segment. When we return from break, we will address what employers and employees can do to support mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Now. Today's topic is mental health in the workplace. So we ended the last segment talking about the culture and the changes in the workplace. What are the benefits for employers and managers to support mental health at work?
So I think the benefits are that, and we've seen that the benefits are that actually there's an improved level of productivity, right? And when employees and team members feel that they're actually able to be their whole self, like they bring their whole self to work, right? When they feel like their boss or their supervisor is really in their corner, is really batting for them, it makes you jump out of bed in the morning, like you wanna go to work. And I think even if you're in a role or a job where there might not necessarily be a direct community or service benefit, we all know what it feels like to have somebody in our corner going, you can do it, you can do it. And then it makes those times when life isn't going well, right? You've already able to have those relationships with your boss or your manager, where you can say, look, I know this isn't my greatest work. But as we talked about 20 minutes ago, my kid's been up vomiting all night, and my head's not in the game, and there becomes a sense of mutuality, of empathy and understanding. But I think it's a challenge for employers to understand how to see things, right, with different lenses, how managers to see things with trauma lenses on. And that's why, we spend a lot of time training people, through conflict, culture, and communication classes, which we run, to view conversations with trauma lenses on, to actually listening, not listening for when the other person stops. So there's great benefits, but it takes a while to get there.
Right, so the culture change comes from education, support, trust. So what can you, in terms of the benefits to an employer or manager?
The benefits are, with that supportive culture, just what he was saying, you end up having a more productive employment relationship. The employee's happier. The employee's willing to give more because they know they're being supported there.
And they're
yes,
not working in fear, right?
Correct. They don't have that fear. They don't have that struggle that's happening because they know they can trust someone. They know they can have a conversation about, today I don't feel my best. Today I need to stay home, or I need an accommodation to be able to get this done. That's language that is typical for how to make these adjustments for if you have any physical conditions. It's the same with mental health conditions. What are the accommodations that need to happen to have this employee be successful? And when you have those conversations and support, you get that loyalty, you get that positive employment relationship that leads to success for both parties.
Yeah, and I totally agree with both you, Chris, and Leslie, and what you were saying about, because all of that speaks to culture. And you mentioned a word, Chris, you talked about empathy, and then also the word that Leslie's mentioned a couple of times, trust. You know, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs on the pyramid, the bottom line is just the bare basics. You know, getting rest, getting fuel, making sure you're hydrated. I always throw exercise in there because movement's important, but Maslow didn't have that. The next level, though, is psychological safety, trust.
Right.
Creating that environment and that culture that invites that conversation to, because ultimately to get to the top of the pyramid, which is our best selves, our best organization, we want to get there. But you don't pass go. You have to go each step of the way. You don't get to race up the pyramid without taking care of those needs. So that culture is huge. And that bottom line, the second level is really all about creating psychological safety, physical safety. You know, years ago I saw what keeps people, this was research, what keeps people where they are. Why do they stay? Having a voice in their organization and what happens next. Being recognized for good work, second. Third one, leaders having compassion and empathy for my personal problems. I would now, where we are in this pandemic, it's almost flipped. Number 3 has become number 1.
Yeah.
When people answer that question, what matters to me when I walk into these doors? And Leslie talked about, you know, having that purpose, hitting the ground and being inspired, you know, my unified purpose. This is our why. I want to go get that, but I also need to know that my employer has my back and they care about me as a person, as a human being.
Right.
And when that happens, it's amazing what the person feels. And that level 2 on the hierarchy of needs is elevated in terms of that psychological safety.
That's great. Thank you so much for impressing upon the importance of looking at employees as humans with emotions. But well, you know, there's that debate, right? So employers are very systematic and automated in their thinking, right? Oftentimes, and what will their challenges be to implement change?
It's a great question because I think the real challenge is you know, and for me as a manager of the people at Advos, right? We have goals and metrics and targets and things that we want to achieve. And so I think managers are tempted to say, I don't have time for the person, I have time for the priorities, right? But 10, 15, 20 minutes on the person, they don't realize we'll up the priorities. And it was interesting because one of my annual feedback that gets done by the board, one of the things early on in COVID that I was challenged for was I was too goal oriented because I was so scared about, you know, this transition to everything virtually. And I was reminded, hey, you know what? Take 10 minutes per check-in to see how the person's doing. And it was a real hit for me because I was trying to be a manager through COVID, right? We had to move everybody. And I'm like trying to suppress the stress that I've got, chucking my kids out of the camera view, like not throwing them literally. But that's going to be the challenge, is balancing the productivity with the person and saying, I got to spend the time on the person and then that'll happen.
Right. It's like building on the infrastructure, right? So we did that at MHA. Right after COVID hit, I thought, oh my goodness, we are going to be bombarded, right? We're going to have to be taking care of people. We can't do it if we're not well. So we did a lot of healing. We did, we really took, I really impressed upon taking very good care of yourself. So building upon that infrastructure, that stability. So at EAP Services is a great program. Not all companies have it, but those who have it, so it's 3 free counseling sessions, right?
Yeah, the session model can differ. It can vary just based on the kind of the story of the organization and what might be what meets their needs. But yes, it can be.
Have any additional programming or any changes in the program of EAP as a result of the increased mental health challenges in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to ours. So at Wellspan EAP, our Employee Assistance Program, we've really focused on, it's not just the counseling, it's not just the session model, it's not just the counseling. If we found out one thing is that utilization actually went down through 2020, and even in 2021, it still didn't rise where it was pre-pandemic. And why was that? That was because people were just trying to do the best they can, kind of swimming at the bottom of the pyramid of Maslow. We're just trying to do the best I can and to take care of things with my family, basic needs. And they were kind of just plowing forward and not really realizing the impact that was building through these last 2 years. Now people are coming out of this pandemic. It's that trauma-informed part that you were talking about, Chris. People are realizing, oh my gosh, now it's really starting to hit me. And so as an EAP, it's important to work with organizations and leaders of organizations and employers, HR leaders as well, about the culture. Because your EAP is only, to me, as good as the culture that supports it. Being able to have conversations like we're talking about today. That I may be, there's a saying that all of us probably have heard this. It's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
And we're big promoters of that. But I think we need to do more than just stop there. We need to acknowledge that, have conversations, and then be able to take it further and how we can offer training, guidance, education, create even structural changes, foundational changes in how you have a meeting. Check in with the human being that's gathered there at that meeting before we get into mission, metrics, and goals.
Yeah.
All of that's important, but the human being, if we don't take care of them, you'll never be able to embrace the full top of that pyramid of the best organization in mission, metrics, and goals.
And I was going to add, I think that requires a shift from the leaders, from the HR staff. Before you were kind of taught not to cross into that personal space with
Right.
asking
That's
about
correct.
That's a great point.
how they are. In order to get to the EAP and have even the utilization, you have to have those initial questions, that initial conversation to be able to do that. And in my career as an HR professional, I would always refer people to the EAP because they did come and confide in me, and that was what they did. But I realized I didn't know what happened. So one of the best things I ever did for myself and the employees was call myself. And I called the EAP. I figured out what that process looked like. I learned from it. I got the help I needed, but I also compounded that because the next time someone said, well, I don't know what it's like, I could walk them through every step of the way
I love that.
what it was like to call the EAP.
That is wonderful. Yeah.
This is what you're going to experience. And it paid off. I had people come back and say, that was the little nudge I needed to make that call.
So it comes from the top down. It's
Yeah,
that
yes.
encouragement, right? So they need to know that they feel safe coming to you. You're gonna, present the programming that's available to support them. One of the things we talk about is leadership too. The leaders are struggling as well.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I think if the leader is transparent in what they're experiencing, everyone else creates that culture again of safety. I keep using that word, safety.
Yeah.
But
It's tough as a leader to be vulnerable because I think, what you were saying, Leslie, like leaders don't know how to be vulnerable and we don't know if it's okay to be vulnerable.
Right.
But the research is now saying that employees will almost mirror the level of vulnerability that employers are. And so one way at Adverse we kind of figured out how to do this, and we stole the idea, I think from Zoom or maybe somebody else, was their team meetings when the pandemic first started, they built in this red, yellow, green to check in with the personal nature of employees, right?
I love that.
And what that did was invited our team to share as much or as little as they felt comfortable. And then what that allowed us to do as managers, as supervisors, as executive directors, was we had something to then say, meeting's done, hey, Bob, hey, Joanne, notice you shared it, what do you need from me?
Right.
What do you need from
That's
us?
great.
And so I think
Yep.
that's where it comes in to say, like, I'm going to almost provide the pool for you to step into, and if you step in there, I'm going to swim alongside you.
And Chris, I
Yeah.
think there's this myth that if you open up conversation about mental health or you allow someone to take the day off, that they're not going to meet their goals. And the reverse is true, right?
it's
So
actually the
there's
opposite.
still, it's the opposite is true, right?
And
So
the big companies have figured this out, right?
Yeah.
The Googles actually and some of these other larger companies, they have 0 quotas on PTOs, right? Because if you hire well, your people follow, right?
Yeah.
And I was just doing a review of one of our directors of restorative justice, and I have to get her to take time off, right?
Right.
And so one of the things I said is I also have to lead in that way. Like I have to take my time
right.
off to take care of
Yes,
myself.
You're right.
And then my team will follow, right? If they see a leader or a manager who never takes time off, it's unhealthy.
Right.
It's so unhealthy to do.
So that leads us into what can employees do to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for the employees, I really do think that like there shouldn't be this like I've banked more days off than you have,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's one thing, right? We've moved
Yeah.
away from that. I think the other challenge is decide what your boundaries are and have open conversations. And this is where conflict gets challenging because one of the things I say as a leader and my team follows is I won't schedule meetings at family dinner time. Right now, if I have to be somewhere, that's different. But every now and then. But the people will follow, right? Don't do meetings back to back, right? Take care of yourself, build in like time, and I think those are really some of the ways that you can do it. Like be responsible for your own conflict, and again, I understand, and that's why I think we're still in business because teaching people how to do conflict
Right.
is a difficult thing to do, and so we want people to understand like when you can do conflict well, and conflict in a healthy way to say, boss, I can't do that because that's the time that I'm going to spend with my family, and if they If they don't agree with that, well, hello, great resignation. Goodbye. Like, you've
Yeah,
lost a key
right,
person.
right.
And I always look at my team, and I want them to know that I don't schedule it, and I won't call them at dinner time, because
Yeah.
that's our mutually agreed idea. So employees can really advocate for themselves by learning how to do conflict well, by sharing, if they have that boundaries, sharing what, and almost, it's difficult, but holding each other accountable.
Right. That's
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was a great conversation.
We could do this all
Thank
day.
you so much. We
I love
could.
it. I love
we
the
could.
passion around the table.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you for joining us for Mental Health Now, Mental Health in the Workplace. Should you need any additional resources, please reach out to us at Mental Health America of Lancaster County.